Hello, and welcome to Reimagining Love. I'm Dr. Alexandra Solomon. I have been studying relationships for over 20 years as a couples therapist, a professor, an award-winning author, and as a wife, mother, daughter, sister, and friend. Now, I'm inviting you into this space each week as I dig into some of the toughest and most fascinating relational dilemmas of our time. If you want to discover how to create vibrant and loving relationships in your own life, you have come to the right place. This is Reimagining Love. Hi there, and welcome back to Reimagining Love. Today's episode is the final installment of our solo episode series that we've been sharing this winter, which delves into family of origin roles. You can visit the show notes of this episode to find links to all of the previous episodes. Today, we're also sharing a really robust, free workbook that takes the themes and the concepts that we've been exploring throughout this series and walks you through your own personal transformation process through some simple but impactful exercises. My team and I have worked so hard on this workbook, and we're so excited that it's finally sharing day and you get to download this workbook and explore. So this workbook is all rooted in this understanding that the role you played as a young person shapes your beliefs and your relational patterns today. So if you would like to get the workbook in your inbox, head to dralexandrasolomon.com/roles workbook, ROLES workbook, and you'll be able to sign up to receive it. And not only will you get the worksheets themselves, but you're also going to receive emails from me guiding you through the exercises so that you get the most out of them. It's like having a therapist in your pocket. Later in the episode, I will share with you an example of one of the exercises from the workbook so you'll get a sense of what's inside. This offering is all about supporting your healing so that you can transform long-standing relationship patterns using the knowledge that you've gained here about your family of origin role. So again, head to dralexandrasolomon.com/roles workbook to make sure that you get this offering. Okay, Rebel, you are patient. You are last, but you are anything but least. We have gone through all 6 of the family of origin roles that I have identified that build on the work that's been in the world of family therapy for several decades. So spotlight's on you, Rebel. Remember, this work is about you getting to know yourself. It's also designed to help you understand the people around you more deeply. So even if you suspect that you are not a rebel, I hope you still listen to the episode because it's going to help you better understand somebody close to you. It will lead to a deeper connection with them. And our plan for today is the plan, that kind of general format we've been following for all these episodes. We're going to unpack the origin story of the rebel. We'll look at the cultural factors that might create and reinforce the rebel role. And then we will kind of fast forward up to the present moment and look at how that rebel role shapes you in friendships, in work relationships, and in intimate partnership. And then we'll talk through some interventions for the partner of the rebel and for the rebel themselves. And again, these interventions are not to fix you. Rather, they are to liberate you from old stories that you have to stand out in order to keep yourself safe and or to be deserving of love and of attention. Okay, so how do we identify the rebel within the family system? And how do you know if it was you? Well, remember, with all of these roles, we ask, how did this child attempt to create stability for the family and emotional safety for themselves? So here, the common theme among rebels is that they attempted to create stability within the system and emotional safety within themselves by pushing back or standing out. So here are some telltale signs that you were the rebel in your family of origin. You were often labeled as difficult or contrarian or argumentative. Your default mode was to push back against your family. Your favorite question was why. You felt different from your family, kind of like the odd one out. You had a hard time falling in line with family rules or norms if you didn't understand why they existed. As an adult, you're the one to call people out when something is not right, and you're not afraid to hold people close to you accountable. You're usually not comfortable just going along with the crowd, and you like to form your own opinions about things. And then for each of our 6 roles, I assign a sort of like bumper sticker or a catchphrase. So for the rebel, the motto or the core belief sounds like this: I am loved to the degree that I stand out. I wanted to share some examples of rebels in pop culture that my team and I came up with. We thought about Kat from 10 Things I Hate About You and how she interrogates all of the conventional thinking, both at her high school and at her home, especially when you compare Kat to her sister Bianca. We thought about Jenny Humphrey in Gossip Girl and how dedicated she is to going against her father's wishes and stirring the pot. And we thought of John Bender in The Breakfast Club, who isn't afraid to cause issues with authority and with his fellow classmates. And you may, by the end of the episode, think of some examples of your own. So send me an email and let me know who you come up with. So, what are the forces that might have contributed to you being cast as the rebel? How did you come to be that way? Perhaps more than other roles in this framework, I think there's a good chance that the rebel role emerges during adolescence more likely than childhood. This means that as you reflect, you may feel like you are the rebel from like 12 years old, 13, 14 onward, for example. But that before that, perhaps you were more of a struggling one, or maybe you were an easy one, or you might have even been like a peacemaker in your family. So perhaps as you entered your teenage years and you began that process of individuation and your ability to understand and analyze the system, as those skills developed, this rebel part of you kind of came online. It's also possible that you showed signs of being the rebel from day one, but I wanted to name up top that you might kind of look at a developmental trajectory for yourself and see that you were in one role for a while and then you kind of grew into more of a rebel stance. And by the way, as we've been sharing the series and as I've been using this framework with clients and students, we're noticing that lots of folks find themselves at the intersection of 2 roles, or they feel that their role kind of evolved as they went through developmental stages of childhood and adolescence. And my hope is that you've listened to all these episodes and that you have a sense of each of these roles. And while you may lean heavily towards one, if you notice parts of yourself in another, that's helpful information. You can think about whether there was a major like circumstantial change or family challenge that prompted the role shift, or whether it was more your coming of age, etc. Or if you just really truly inhabited 2 roles at once. Remember, this is not like, it's not like blood type. There's nothing hard and fast about these roles. The intention here is to give you a heuristic or a framework that opens up new avenues of relational self-awareness and that opens up new kinds of conversations between you and the people in your life. It's just a portal. It's just an opener. So that's really the point here, is to give you some framing and some context and some powerful ways to connect then to now. So when we talk about the rebel, it's really important that we clarify what rebellious really means. When we think about rebels in movies or TV, like some of the characters that I mentioned a moment ago, we often think about somebody who appears outwardly rebellious, like in their dress, or who questions societal norms, who's a troublemaker, who's anti-establishment in some way. And that's certainly a possible profile of a rebel. But remember, when we're talking about the rebel here in this framework, it's about a child who rebelled within a very specific system, the family system. So it is the case that systems that are thriving, systems that are healthy and adaptive, tend to have a high threshold for individuality and for self-expression in dress, in thought, in interest. Like think like a system that is healthy is supple, it's flexible. So you can be yourself. You can walk to the beat of your own drummer. There's capacity within the system to tolerate difference. By contrast, systems that are dysfunctional or struggling are more rigid and tend to place a high value on conformity as a means of attempting to create stability. So, in a system like that, when somebody is different, when somebody is standing out, it's noticed and it's labeled as problematic or threatening or unacceptable. What's seen as rebellious depends on number one, what the normative characteristics of that system are, and number two, how an individual might stand apart from those characteristics. So, for example, an artist in a family of scientists is going to seem rebellious, perhaps within that community, or the other way around, a scientist in a family of creatives. And in a struggling system, that system doesn't understand how to make space for and how to celebrate the one who is different. So, in a chaotic or a rigid system that doesn't embrace difference, that doesn't hold space for nonconformity. It can also be the case that a child's quote unquote rebellion could also just be due to the fact that they are different by nature. And that feels unfair, but they still may have been cast into that rebel role nonetheless. Maybe, for example, they're the only one who has a different sexual orientation or gender identity, for example. I'm thinking about the beautiful book that Andrew Solomon wrote a number of years ago called Far from the Tree, where it was all about kind of the one in the family who's different from the rest. A system that doesn't know how to handle that is at risk of pathologizing, labeling, otherizing, and sort of seeing them as a rebel rather than kind of expanding and inhaling into a broader definition of what it means to truly belong, that you can be different, even in a significant way from the rest of the system and still belong. So this is all to say, you didn't have to be breaking school rules or wearing edgy clothes to be the rebel. It was somehow about your resistance to conform or your inability to conform to the features of your particular family system. In each of these role explorations, we've been observing how the adherence to a role is an attempt to, number one, create stability for the family system, and number two, to create emotional safety for the individual. So remember, these roles are attempts to serve an individual need. I need to be emotionally safe because I'm a kid, and a family system need. This family system needs homeostasis, needs some approximation of balance. So let's look at both. How exactly does having somebody who's different and disruptive serve the system? How does the rebel serve the system? What's the function there? Well, I would argue to you that a rebel in a family system functions almost like a guardrail or a course correct for a system that is at risk of kind of veering off too far in one direction. So if you were the rebel in your family system, your willingness to call bullshit on the stuff that was going on around you might have kind of snapped the adults out of their stupor. It might have gotten the adults somehow back in line, at least for the moment. Okay, well, how would being a rebel be an attempt to create emotional safety for you as an individual? All right. Deep breath. We're going in. We're going deep. Here are some thoughts that I have for you about how the rebel role is an attempt to create emotional safety. Part of how a kid attempts to create emotional safety is via attention. Kids need attention, like truly need attention. Attention is like air and water. It's a matter of survival when we're little because if we disappear or if we are left behind, we die. It's like existential for us when we're little. So in a healthy family system, you get attention just because you exist. In a struggling family system, you got to hustle for attention. And for the rebel, standing out or pushing back may have been the only way to garner attention in that chaotic system where adults didn't have time or bandwidth to focus on kids. And while some kids respond to that lack of attention by becoming perfect ones in the hopes that their performance is going to secure them some attention and affirmation. Some people become rebels because even if they're being seen as a problem by their parents, at least they're getting attention. It's like by any means necessary. Any press is good press, according to the rebel. And that is certainly, that works. It is effective. It may also be the case that you adopted this rebel role because you had tried to create emotional safety for yourself in some other ways, but those other ways just weren't working. So you had to go another route. You began to push back against the system. You began to call out the system, and you created a protective shell. So it may be the case that becoming the rebel was almost like a fallback stance. It was an alternative route to emotional safety when other routes hadn't worked, when you couldn't do it any other way. Hand on your heart if this is getting a little bit tender. It also sometimes is the case that a rebel emerges within a system that has highly critical authority figures. For example, if your mother was extremely tough on you and you felt like nothing that you did was ever enough, you may have formed that rebel shell, responding to every demand and wish with pushback and disdain as a self-protective measure. You may have thought to yourself, consciously or subconsciously, she's going to criticize me no matter what. But if I'm acting out and sassing, at least I know then what she's going to criticize me on. And that is somehow less painful than it being a sneak attack or a surprise or a criticism on something that feels really vulnerable that I didn't choose. If I act out, I am choosing, or I have some modicum of control over where my criticism hits me, like where the criticism comes in. It feels far worse to try to fit a parent's ideal and fall short again and again and again. So a rebel takes another route. They get control over a situation that otherwise feels pretty out of control. The idea is you can't hurt me anymore, and therefore I have some approximation at least of emotional safety. It's important to note that that tendency to rebel against the system can actually be very adaptive. It might have been your lifesaver. Your rebellion against a system that is struggling might have saved you from falling into whatever patterns of dysfunction and addiction and underfunctioning other people in your family system slipped into. In that situation, it must have been lonely as heck to be the rebel. But if that was part of what helped you get out, so to speak, and chart your own course, then we got to figure out how to bless that survival strategy and thank that survival strategy. And even though it's so sad that that's what you had to do, thank goodness you did what you had to do to get out and be wherever you are today. As we discussed before, across these episodes, the more chaotic or rigid the family system, the more intensified the roles are going to be. If you had some of these rebel-like qualities within a family system that was thriving, where debate was part of the family culture, where dialogue was a route to connection, I suspect that your tendency to stand out, to disagree, or to push back was tolerated and was maybe even valued. It was maybe even seen as aspirational. And by the way, that quality of being able to push back and speak up and self-express and be unique, those are qualities that I deeply want parents to cultivate in their kids. Families that invite self-expression and healthy debate are cultivating critical thinking skills in their kids. I recently watched Michael Pollan's masterclass, and in the masterclass, he talked about really fond memories that he had of dinner time conversation when he was growing up, where in his family system, debate and dialogue and self-expression were valued. And he makes this parallel that the family dinner table is actually the seat of democracy. It's such a bold statement to kind of like parallel the micro world of the family dinner table and the macro system of democracy. But I don't think it's overstated. Like that's the testing ground for how you create those like foundational principles of conversation and debate. It's also the case that families that invite individuality and self expression are inoculating their kids against future maltreatment. If a kid learns when they're young that their voice matters, that their hot takes matter, they grow up being less likely to be taken advantage of by a partner or a boss who doesn't have their best interests at heart. If you teach your kids to comply just because someone tells you to comply, in that way, you are setting them up later in their lives to be taken advantage of. All of this is to say that being rebellious in that kind of thriving or healthy family system might not even get you labeled as a rebel. But being a rebel in a struggling family system is going to kick up a lot more dust than in a family system that can handle disagreements, that can handle the questioning of authority. In a brittle or an overwhelmed system, any debate or questioning feels threatening. The system is fragile, and the message is that people need to get in line, get with the program to ensure that the whole thing doesn't just fall apart. Now we're at the important part of the episode where we explore how your role as the rebel may have intersected with other aspects of your identity or your experience or your family's situation. We touched on this earlier, but if there was something about you that made you different from the other members of your family, for example, if you were the only queer one in a family full of straight folks, or if you were an adopted child, you ought not have been seen as the rebel because your difference was just part of who you were. It was an identity. But you may have found yourself in that role, especially if your family couldn't figure out how to make space for your different experiences. I also think about rebels who emerged in situations where the family system itself was quote unquote other within their country or within their community, whether because they had newly immigrated to a country, whether they were the only family of a certain race or ethnicity in their town or in their school, or if they were a religious minority. To a family that is feeling the pressures of assimilation, as well as the need to preserve and hold on to their cultural identity, a rebel child's pushback might feel even more threatening to the system. And I'm going to be really careful and not make any sweeping statements here. But if you identify as a rebel, I really do want you to think about the cultural circumstances of your childhood and the degree to which those specific conditions may have impacted how your family of origin could or couldn't handle your rebellion. I think that exploration of kind of mapping your role onto your system, your family system, and then onto the broader community in which you were embedded is all really rich and really fruitful self exploration, and certainly something that I want you to explore with your partner because it's ways of peeling back those layers and helping you be more deeply understood by the people who love you. Let's just look at gender for a hot minute. When it comes to gender, particularly if we're thinking about a rebel coming into their own adolescence, I'm thinking about a rebel who was a girl and a rebel who was a boy likely faced different reactions to their rebellions and may have experimented with different behaviors to get a rise out of the system or to question authority in order to feel powerful. And then they in turn would also have faced different cultural ramifications based on gender. So I'm thinking perhaps a boy might have been sort of feared as a tough guy or respected as being a free thinker or independent. Whereas if you were a girl and if your rebellion involved you leaning into your sexuality or becoming a bit more front facing regarding your sexuality, you may have been punished for that by your family, by your classmates, by your community. If you were playing with amplifying your sexuality in order to feel powerful as a girl, as a young woman, and or in order to express a little bit of a middle finger to your family, You may have faced the cultural ramifications of slut shaming in a way that a boy simply would not. Let's keep going now. And we just explored all of the etiology, family, and culture. And we're going to fast forward now to the present moment. Let's look together at how the family of origin role of the rebel shows up now in adulthood in three contexts: at work, in friendship, and in romantic partnership. Okay, work is first. In a previous episode of this series, I talked to you about Karpman's drama triangle, which I love. It's a really helpful framework for looking at group dynamics. The idea here is that in any dysfunctional or chaotic group dynamic, folks tend to fall into one of three roles: the victim, the persecutor, and the rescuer. The victim has a helpless approach. They sort of act like they're at the mercy of life. They don't take responsibility for their part in the co-creation of a dynamic. The rescuer constantly intervenes on behalf of the victim. The rescuer feels tired and vigilant. And the persecutor stands outside of the dynamic, blaming the victim and judging the rescuer. And the persecutor in this dynamic is critical and rigid. And the point here is that these are roles. So when there's a drama triangle that has taken off, that has taken root, the people in each of those positions have somewhat of an individual valence to take on that role. It's not just like absolute chance why I become the rescuer and you become the victim and, our sister becomes the persecutor. It's not just totally by chance. There's some measure of individual difference that is like temperament, personality, family of origin experience that leads us to be in those roles. But it also is that the nature of a dysfunctional system is a dysfunctional system casts people into those roles. That's the deal behind Karpman's drama triangle. So after Karpman identified the dysfunctional roles that we tend to play in group dynamics, he went on to create the empowerment triangle to highlight the fact that we aren't stuck. These aren't hard and fast dynamics. And as a system is healthier, people are liberated from those drama roles and can start to take on empowered roles. So in the empowerment triangle, the victim becomes the creator. So they move from being helpless to agentic, and they take on, rather than feeling like they're at the mercy of life, they feel like, okay, I can do it. I can be in the driver's seat of my own experience. The rescuer becomes the coach. So the rescuer moves from codependence and pity and over-involvement and moves into assistance and asking questions like, okay, what are you thinking? How do you think you might want to handle this? And the persecutor becomes the challenger. So the persecutor moves from blaming and criticizing and standing outside of the system, kind of poking at it, to taking part in co-creating the conditions for people to grow and learn and feel powerful in their own experiences. So you may see where I'm going already. So where might we locate the rebel within these triangles? Well, I would posit to you that in a chaotic system, the rebel most likely is going to take on the role of a persecutor. They are there to balance the system, and they've got this kind of tendency towards being edgy. And so they, at worst, in an unhealthy situation, are going to become a persecutor. As that rebel heals, as they are part of healthier dynamics, then the rebel is so well positioned to be a challenger. And a challenger is a vital part of any system. A challenger is a thoughtful force that prevents groupthink. The challenger sees things clearly. The challenger is brave enough to point out problems so that everybody can change and evolve for the better. So when I think of you as a rebel in a work setting, I do think that you are potentially at risk of busting people's chops, of being controlling, of being argumentative, of being more critical than perhaps you need to be. But as a rebel, you are a vital member of a team when you are able to, number one, practice discernment, knowing when to speak up and when to hang back. And number two, when you are able to craft your observations with tact so that your message doesn't get lost in your delivery. At worst, the rebel is sort of like a workplace bully who shuts people down. At best, the rebel can push a group to be better and to think bigger. At best, a rebel helps create an environment where people feel empowered to speak up and to share different opinions. So, what's essential here is for you to continue to learn how to embody the role of the challenger and for you to be working in a space that appreciates the concerns you raise rather than punishes you for the concerns you raise, right? If the system you're working for is highly rigid and demands conformity, you're going to be unhappy and you're going to be unappreciated and your skill is going to be underutilized. But it has to be a both and. As a rebel, it's your job to learn how to refine when and how you raise your concerns. It's helpful for you to remember that your work situation is not your family of origin. You don't have to do the things in this work setting that you had to do back then. And as an empowered adult, you get to be discerning and you get to learn how to speak your concerns softly but clearly. And you ideally need to be in a system that values and appreciates having a member who's not afraid to rock the boat a little bit, where you are viewed as innovative, not insubordinate. Okay, friendship. Your friends are likely drawn to you because of your individuality. You have your own style, you have your own way of doing things, you've got interesting takes on everything from the hottest new TV show to a friend's new relationship. And these are great qualities that make you you. You also are pretty badass to have in your corner. Like, who wouldn't want to be in the corner of somebody who, like, when it's time to speak up, having a friend who's a rebel is like there to speak up on your behalf. What can be challenging for the rebel is learning that there are times and places where your hot take isn't necessary, it's not warranted, and it's not helpful. While you may be tempted to say something like, well, that's just who I am. I'm just a tell it like it is kind of a person. You may have noticed that this tendency can wear people down, especially if they are more sensitive or if they grew up in a family system that didn't argue or debate. A while back, I did a two-part series on reimagining love. One episode was called People Pleasing versus Brutal Honesty: When and How to Share Feedback with Your Partner. And the other one was called When Having No Filter Hurts a Relationship. So if this is seeming like it may be a growing edge for you in your relationships, we have linked those episodes in the show notes. But I want to say that it can be really hard for the rebel to take a seat. After all, you have formed your identity and your sense of safety around rocking the boat. So, what I ask rebels to do when it comes to their friendships is to bless that rebel part that lives inside of you and to thank that rebel for all the ways in which that part of you learned how to protest in order to keep you safe back then, and to let that rebel part of you know that they get to rest. Because guess what? It's freaking exhausting. It's exhausting to be putting in the emotional labor of feeling like you have to speak up at every moment and you can't relax and you can't just let things unfold. But I will tell you that you and your friends will be better off if once in a while you can just let that rebel rest. Now, let's talk about the rebel in love, the rebel in intimate relationships, and we'll start with dating. So I will say that for the rebel, the process of dating carries with it a threat because at some point along the way in your upbringing, you made a decision or you got the message that you had to have your own back and that your surest route to safety is independence and standing on your own and standing outside of a system. Belonging was risky. But falling in love and becoming interdependent confronts your old story. Your old story is it's risky AF to let your guard down. Your old story is you have to be different from, you have to be an outsider, you have to stand apart. So dating, making a new connection, falling in love, these will all require you as a rebel to just be on your healing journey. You are healing, you are recovering, and it is your work, your loving work, to tend to your fear, to tend to that part of you that is convinced that the only way to be safe is to be different and to stand alone. As a rebel, when you are seeking out a romantic partnership, I of course want you to find a connection where differences are celebrated, where your uniqueness is seen as a strength. But I want you to be in a relationship where your uniqueness doesn't have to be proven again and again, where it's safe for you to maintain your special sauce, but where it's also safe for you to agree, to conform, to surrender. Those are all such healing experiences for you. A rebel is used to finding fault as a way to be safe. And certainly that's going to come with you into your relationship. But the wonderful thing is here, the reward that you get for cultivating a healthy adult romantic relationship is that you don't have to critique this little system. Like you and your partner are creating a new system, the two of you, and you don't have to critique that system anymore. You chose well, you created a connection, so you don't have to critique it. You had to critique your dysfunctional family in order to hold on to your sense of sanity, in order to hold on to your sense of self. But the reward you get today is that you don't have to do that anymore. You can just let your romantic relationship be good. Let's move on now to treatment, to healing practices. Just insight in and of itself, everything we've talked about to this point, the insight is itself a huge part of the transformation. The process you're going through of connecting the dots between then and now is going to help you create the shifts that you need to create. And it's going to help you remember that you don't have to do what you've always done. But let me get more specific now about some treatment suggestions that are designed to help the rebel loosen the grip of this family of origin role so that you get to have a fuller and more flexible repertoire of relational responses. So I'm going to talk first to the partner of the rebel. So, partner of the rebel, I suspect that you are drawn to your rebel's free spirit and their ferocity. And I'm thinking if you were an easy one or if you were a parentified child, you might have been attracted to those qualities and maybe even like sort of borrow some of their ability to self advocate without apology, speak truth to power without even breaking a sweat. So it's like, there's some complementarity here, right? If you were an easy one, if you were a parentified child, you're drawn to the rebel because you're like, damn, you can just speak up without even your voice wavering a little bit, without even blushing at all. So if there were times for you, if you were an easy one, if you were a parentified child, for example, if there were times where you, when you were little, felt all alone in an overwhelming dynamic, then for you, it's like your inner child, is linking up with your partner's rebel inner child. And that joining of forces might feel to you like a very long overdue partnership. I'm like hearing the lyrics to Jay-Z and Beyonce's "Oh 03 Bonnie and Clyde" in my head as I think about what that might feel like for your inner child reaching for your rebel partner's inner child, like that kind of like us against the world dynamic where you're finally not alone. You finally have somebody who's unafraid to, speak up for you and advocate for you. I suspect that alongside the admiration you feel regarding these qualities of your rebel partner, I suspect that sometimes you experience your rebel partner as argumentative. So I want to invite and challenge you a little bit. I think a compassion opener for you is to ask you to take the rebel partner's argumentativeness a little bit less personally. What happens if you remind yourself that that tendency helped your partner feel protected during a time when they were young, when they had nobody there to protect them. So, my ask here of you is to just hold on to that insight about your partner. It's not an excuse, it's a context. Reminding yourself of your partner's history will help you take their pushback less personally. Remind yourself it's not a personal attack, it's a skill deficit. And then when you reminded yourself of that, then you can decide your next move. You don't have to reactively argue back. You can decide your next move. Your next move might just be offering silent empathy to your partner, thinking to yourself, ooh, okay, my partner is showing me how they used to keep themselves safe as a kid. Letting a moment pass without comment, sometimes, not all the time, is a mercy. You can let a moment pass without it meaning you're self abandoning. So, what happens if you don't kind of call your rebel partner out on every time that they are, you know, being argumentative at a time they don't have to be argumentative? The other thing that you might do is to speak up. See what happens when you speak up with compassion. You might say something to your partner like this: you know what? You see it the way you see it. I see it the way I see it. And we're both okay, right? That's really neutralizing. It's not you one upping. It's not you escalating. It's you saying to your partner, okay, you see this the way you see it. I see this the way I see it. And we're both okay. I think especially if both you and your rebel partner have listened to this episode, I want to recommend a conversation between the two of you, but not at a moment when you feel like your rebel partner's rebelness is in full effect. So when we try to hold up a mirror to someone in the heat of the moment, we're most likely to get pushback. We're probably going to get defensiveness. So at a separate time, what might happen if you say something like this? You know what, my love? I'd really like to have a conversation with you about how our relationship can be a place where we get to feel like we no longer need to rely on our old coping strategies. I have some thoughts about behaviors that I'm working on changing within myself. And I would love to talk to you about how you can support me as I work on some of my growing edges. And I have some observations about ways that you relate to me at times that I think come from your past. And I want to be able to talk to you about how I can be a support to you in shifting out of some of your ingrained old behaviors as well. And I wonder if you might be open to that. And then, if and when your rebel partner agrees, here are 5 reminders for you. Ready? Number 1, make sure that you actually do have some thoughts about your own behavior. Because if you open by talking about yourself, your coping strategies, how you're trying to change them, how your partner can support you, if you start with that, you are modeling the kind of change that you want to see in the relationship. You can't force your partner to be willing to look at their behavior, but you certainly can stack the deck in the favor of that by talking about yourself. Number 2, as you share with your partner the tendencies that they have that you think emerged from their family of origin role, I want you to front load all of that by saying, listen, given the dynamics in your family, this behavior of yours makes total sense. In fact, there's a way in which I am so grateful that you learned how to protect yourself in this way. That old coping strategy of yours is surely part of what got you through and part of what brought you to me. Number 3, bring up a specific example of your rebel partner's behavior that you would like to encourage them to maybe try to do a bit differently. And when you bring up a specific example, make sure it's an example that is like irritating, but not deeply troubling for you, like a low hanging fruit, like a really pretty minor thing that is emblematic of a bigger thing. Don't bring up the bigger thing. Bring up the minor thing. Why? Because it increases the chances that you can stay calm and regulated as you talk through the example with your partner. And it increases the chances that your partner doesn't get defensive, but stays curious. And then the two of you are together. You're shoulder to shoulder looking together at this example with a little bit of a fresh eyes, through the lens of family of origin roles. Okay, number 4, propose an alternative. So rather than just saying to your partner, stop doing that, don't do that anymore, suggest what you specifically would have wanted them to do or say instead. You can script it. Obviously, they're not going to use the exact words that you're using, but be specific. Show them with your words, give samples of the behavior that you would like to see and experience instead. And then number 5, ask your partner what the best way is for you to cue them in the future. Is it a code word? Is it a hand gesture or a signal? Do they want you to just bring it up in a direct way, but a kind way? I would venture to say that given that your partner is a rebel, I suspect they might welcome your directness. Like, just tell me. All right, partner of the rebel, here is me wishing for you that your relationship can truly be a corrective emotional experience for you, certainly, but also for your rebel partner, that they get to experience with you a deep sense of joining and belonging that they just didn't get to experience growing up. Okay, moving on to our rebel. All right, rebel. Hi. Let's talk now about how you can liberate yourself from the limitations of your old role. So remember, this is not about you being broken or bad or wrong. It is just about the fact that you don't have to do now what you did have to do then. And I want to return to my promise from the top of the show and give you a little sneak peek into our free workbook, the workbook that I'm sharing as a way of tying a bow on this series. As a reminder, head to dralexandersolomon.com/roles workbook to get the workbook, along with a series of emails from me that guide you through how to use the workbook. So one of the exercises you're going to go through in the workbook is addressing one of your frustrating patterns, one that is connected to your family of origin role. And in this exercise, we first share an example of a frustrating pattern, and we offer 3 possible steps for how to address it. And then after we walk through that, you have a chance to name your own patterns and create that plan for you. So here's the example that we share in the workbook. Alexis has noticed that whenever her partner Anna shares an opinion about a movie or a TV show, Alexis compulsively finds a way to disagree with it. She was the rebel in her family of origin, and playing this role brought her necessary attention in a chaotic family system. Alexis does not want to automatically challenge Anna, but when she agrees with her, she feels like she's betraying her authenticity. However, now that she has identified where this tendency originates from, she's ready to drop the old story and make a change. Possible first steps for Alexis. She could notice her urge to counter Anna's opinion and take a deep breath before she says anything. She can take note of that urgent feeling inside, and she can remind herself that it is safe to pause and just listen. Another first step is this. Before Alexis even leaves the movie theater with Anna, before she even begins discussion of the film with Anna, Alexis takes a moment and reminds herself that she can validate a different opinion without betraying herself. Another option is this. Instead of jumping in with a response, Alexis can try asking Anna a follow-up question instead. So Alexis can just get curious about Anna's perspective and draw her out a bit more. This also helps Alexis kind of bide a little bit of time while the urge to debate kind of like quiets inside of her. So if you're interested in doing this exercise for yourself, I hope that you check out the workbook. These are micro practices. They're just small tweaks that give you a different experience inside of your body and that evoke a different response from your partner. That's where the magic happens also. When you do something slightly different inside of you, you get that powerful experience of noticing that something different comes forward in your partner. Micro practices pack a big punch. That's how we change. We change iteratively. We change with practice, with repeated experiences. We're not going for dramatic personality overhauls. We're going for small shifts that are about letting yourself know that you can exhale, that you can blend, that you can belong. So, Rebel, here are 5 general principles I want to invite you to consider. Number 1, just start to notice when you have an urge to jump in and share your opinion. What's it like to step back in these moments? What does it feel like inside of your body? What does it feel like after the conversation is over? Urgency feels so pressing in the moment. Play with what it's like to ride the wave of urgency, like feel it rise inside of you, crest, and then retreat. When you opt to quiet your urgent expression and you say nothing, what happens next? What's the quality of connection like with your partner? Does your partner seem a bit softer to you? Are they a bit more open to you? Just collect this as data. Just observe. The noticing and the observing and the experimenting is so powerful. Like just the process of experimenting, right? In order to experiment, you have to be more intentional. When you are intentional, you're sort of shaken up out of your usual knee-jerk habit response that comes from your role. Number 2, the second principle I want you to consider in your healing journey is this. Sometimes silence is the best route to connection. You can be safe and you can be close, even if you had a concern that you did not raise. Not all the time, but some of the time. As a rebel in recovery, I want you to really be able to land that experience inside of yourself, that you can be silent and connected. Number 3, consider what information you might be depriving yourself of when you don't take a step back. What does your knee-jerk, debatey response keep you from hearing, seeing, sensing, noticing? When you step back, when you leave that space, you might gain some clarity about your partner's experience, about your partner's perspective that you otherwise are missing. Number 4, increase your use of the word we and of the word us. There was some research in 2018 out of the University of California, Riverside, and they found that couples who use more first person plural pronouns, we and us, have higher relationship satisfaction. And I suspect that as a rebel, you might reach more for me language than we language. So part of your recovery is sprinkling in some we. Sprinkle in some more we. See how it feels inside of you. See what it draws forth in your partner. You and your partner get to create this whole little culture, your little couple culture. You're creating that together. That's the culture of your relationship. I think feeling deeply identified with your couple relationship, with this we that you're creating, that also, like just that practice is healing to the rebel who never felt like they could fit in or should fit in. Number 5 is certainly continue to hold on to and express your uniqueness because certainly that's important to you. And the cool thing is, now that you're an adult, you are safe. You get to express yourself versus when you were little, you had to do those things. You had to be unique and different in order to be safe. You're not doing it for safety reasons anymore. You're doing it because you get to be unique and self-expressed. You don't have to, you get to. Okay, I'm going to close with mantras. We've done this at the end of each of the episodes for each of the 6 roles. So, Rebel, I've got some mantras for you. Feel free to write them down in your journal, put them on your bulletin board, put them as a voice memo in your phone or a note in your phone. I've got 5 mantras for you. Here they are. Number 1, I don't have to be different to be safe. Number 2, silence is also an act of love sometimes. Number 3, I don't have to attend every fight that I'm invited to. Number 4, agreement does not equal self-erasure. Number 5, I have nothing to prove. Okay, as a final reminder, if you want to sign up for the workbook that goes along with this series, you are going to find that link in the show notes. We've got exercises, we've got journal prompts designed to support your self-healing. And if you've been listening to this series, this is the perfect time to dive into that work while all of this is still fresh in your mind and in your heart. So head to dralexandrasolomon.com/roles workbook to get that resource. Thank you for joining me on this Family of Origin Roles journey. And until next time, be well. Thank you for listening to our show. Our producers are Elizabeth Vogt and Mary Chan and Katie Paggich of Organized Sound Productions. Our theme music was composed by Slade Warnkin. The show is executive produced by me, Dr. Alexandra Solomon. Do you have a relationship question that you want answered on the show? Visit reimagininglove.com to send in a written or audio question. Questions can be about intimate partnerships, family relationships, friendships, you name it. If you're looking for more love and relationship content, you can find me on Instagram at dr.alexandra.solomon or visit my website, dralexandrasolomon.com, where you'll find my blog as well as the Intimate Relationships 101 e-course based off of the popular class I teach at Northwestern University. Thank you for listening and see you next week here on Reimagining Love.